At start time. All righty. Well, looks like we're here. So again, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Barbara Johnson, and I'm very happy to be here with you this afternoon, or at least where I'm at. I'm in California, so I'll say good morning, good late morning. And I imagine you're all here to learn about passing the CISSP exam. And first tip, everyone, CISSP is shorthand for the Certified Information System Security Professional. Kind of a long-winded name. That's why we use CISSP. So welcome everyone. And thank you for joining. My name is Barbara Johnson. And again, I'm happy to be here with you for the next couple of hours. You see my tagline on the screen: security is my purpose and education is my passion. I am a security practitioner, a security consultant, as you see from a number of industries on the screen. I love to create, I love to improve security programs, but education is my passion because when I'm educating a number of folks, I'm able to help so many more companies at once. And that does bring, well, we'll say joy to me. So as far as my being an educator, I'm an authorized instructor for ISC Squared and ISACA and CompTIA. And very recently, I had the honor of creating a cybersecurity certificate program for MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So again, I just want to bring a more secure world. So thank you again for joining. So what we'll be working on, of course, is promoting your preparation for the CISSP exam. And could I learn, who of you are planning to take the exam? Or if you feel comfortable to type in chat if you're planning to take the exam, or maybe you are here to get your CPEs and maybe learn how to mentor other candidates to become a CISSP. Oh, outstanding. All right, planning to take it at some point. Well, best wishes, Cal and Mark as well. Coming along in the next 30, 60 days, Brandon and Charles. Excellent. And very soon with Tasia and Jeremy coming along. And oh, next year out for Chris. Excellent. Karen and Emily too, and Ryan and Tremaine. So best wishes, everyone. And hey, how about y'all wish each other success as well? I always love doing that because I feel we're all together. We're all together. We're all a community and support for each other. Excellent. Lovely comments, everyone. Excellent. So what I plan to do is talk with you a bit about the exam and highlight several of the domains, also share study tips. And that's a very funny, I'm reading Jeremy's note. Won't be easy, but what we're going to do is talk about easing. So perfect segue for me, Jeremy, easing your exam day. And of course, I do want to be available to answer any of your questions as well. So first of all, I also want to congratulate ISC Squared. They have been in business, been in organization for 30 years, and it's the 30th anniversary of the CISSP exam. And maybe some of you have wondered, what does ISC2 stand for? It's the International Information System Security Certification Consortium. That's why we call it ISC2. And very recently, they took away the parentheses and the exponential sign, because it turns out the parentheses were triggering on some email spam filters. Of course, a
Huh,
good security measure, right?
it's interesting.
Yeah, there's always a reason for everything. Excellent. And as you see on the screen, ISC Squared's vision, a safe and secure cyber world, which I wholeheartedly in my heart, in my soul support, and the purpose, educating, empowering, embracing, and engaging members every step of their career. Now, ISC Squared does have 675,000-ish members. Many, of course, are candidates to take an examination. Some may have already done the cybersecurity certificate. That's kind of that newer one. That's for entry-level folks, and the goal is to get 1 million certified in cybersecurity. And currently we have over 165,000 CISSPs. So ISC Squared again has the CISSP, and it is the gold standard for security, the premier cybersecurity certification. Now, as far as a bit of an overview for the CISSP examination, it has an adaptive structure. And what that means is everyone will have a very different experience. So if by chance, someone says, "Ah, don't worry about this, don't worry about that. I didn't come across it on my exam." Well, goodness, I do need you to put some energy into all of those different topics, because you can have a very different exam experience than these other folks, and you could face those particular questions. For example, I've sometimes had two people testing at the same moment. One says, "Oh, yeah, I had to know those network telecommunication port numbers and protocols," and the other one did not. I'll have another two people testing at the same moment. One will say, "Oh, I had to know those cryptographic algorithms and key lengths." The other one, "No, I just had to know cryptographic principles." So because everybody does have a very different exam experience with this adaptive exam structure, I need us all to work our way across every single topic. Now, also as an adaptive exam structure, you'll see a variable number of questions. Some folks might see as few as 100 questions. Some will see up to 150 questions. And you can pass anywhere across that spectrum. All that matters is that we pass, right? So everybody's exam does include 25 beta questions. Beta questions are unscored questions, but here's the thing, you have no idea of which ones they are. They'll be scattered across that first 100. Now, again, they're beta, they're research questions. What happens is ISC Squared. Oh, great question, Tasia. What happened is long ago, the exam was a linear format, and everybody did see 250 questions. Then ISC Squared, I'll say, took some baby steps. They kept with 250 questions and made it no go back. And then they switched over to this adaptive approach, where at 100 questions, the exam is actually going to stop and do some calculations and determine, have you demonstrated sufficient proficiency that we can pass you at 150. But if you see more questions, the exam is offering you more opportunity to pass. So it's okay if someone sees 101, 113, 150, it's all good. the exam wants you to pass. Now, but actually, if I can hinge off of Tasia's, oh, and please correct me if I'm mispronouncing.
It is Tasia, but a lot of people get it wrong. So I was gonna let you just have it. It's okay.
Well, Tasia, I am so happy to hear your voice, Tasia. And if I can hinge, I hope you don't mind if I can hinge off your question, where Google said it has 250. That's actually, if I can hinge, one of our security model theories known as BIBA. With BIBA, we only want to use trustworthy information. Oops, I'm just trying to get my pen over. Oh, there we go. With the BIBA security model, it's all about integrity and that we obtain trustworthy information to use in our analysis and to use in our decision making. So what that means is I'm going to have a hierarchical integrity policy. Again, thinking about trustworthy information. So for example, if I get the information directly from ISC2's website, that's super, super duper trustworthy. If you get the information from Barbara, we'll put that in that middle layer of trust. But if we get the information off of pure Google, we'll call that low trustworthy information. So when it comes to obtaining information, reading information to use in our analysis to make decisions, certainly we want to use Barbara's information or directly from ISC2. We don't want to obtain information from Google, directly from Google, because who knows whether it's right, whether it's wrong. It's like Wikipedia. Anyone could put anything out in Wikipedia. So this is known as the simple integrity property. And again, it has to do with reading. Okay. Well, thank you for letting me use your question there, Tasia, to do a little pitch, do a little start. BIBA does go on for more principles because you have to deal with the writing principle. When can you write information? And also the invocation principle. So there's a bit more to that model. But I always love to borrow, love to borrow. There we go. So anyhow, all good, and great questions. And everybody feel free to put questions in chat or open up your microphones. So again, we've got the variable number of questions. 25 are beta, unscored, and you have no idea of which ones they are. So you come across a crazy, quirky question, I just want you to say, hey, that's a beta question. I'm going to always do my best. I'm always going to answer every single question, but I don't want to let anything throw me off. Oh, it's also a go forward only model. There's no returning to a prior question. So I always want you to do your best on every single question before you click to submit it. And at 100 questions, the exam will pause while it calculates, hey, have you demonstrated sufficient proficiency? We're going to pass you at 100 questions. And again, if you see more, it's okay. The exam is offering you more opportunity to pass the exam. Now, there are a variety of question styles. Some will be straight multiple choices, A, B, C, D. Some are going to be scenario where you see a few paragraphs and then they freeze frame those paragraphs and float in a question, float in another question, and then could even float in more questions. So, and then the innovative style. With the innovative, that would be like drag and drops or click. Where would you place a security tool? Now, Passing score is 700 points out of 1,000. It's a scaled exam. So this is kind of an interesting note over here. You have to be above proficient in each and every domain. That means we have to be rock solid in all domains. And the reason I want to point that out is sometimes I'll show you in a moment where you see percentages. Sometimes people say, oh, that's a tiny domain. Don't worry about it. On this exam, I need you to be strong, solid for every domain to pass the exam. Oh, by the way, the exam itself costs around $750, but I'll ask you to check your training camp account executive or with helpdesk at trainingcamp.com for the exact prices and if there's, of course, any promotional opportunities. So, on the exam, you'll be tested again across all these different domains. And once again, you have to be solid. You have to be above proficient in all domains to pass the exam. So sometimes I'll have people who in my class, they'll say, oh, Barbara, domain 1, security and risk management, that bores me. I'm going to have to respond, I am sorry about that, but here's the thing. You better learn to love it and start loving domain 1 right here, right now, because not only is that a heavy hitter on the exam, it's actually a foundational domain that informs all my other domains. So again, I need everybody to, again, put energy in every single domain to pass the exam. Even this lighter one down here with domain 8, software development security. Granted, it's only 10% of the exam, but again, we have to pass that one as well. So what I'd like to do is do a little bit of a, we'll call it a walkthrough on domains 1 and domain 2. And again, feel free to ask your questions as we go along. So what I've done here is for each of the domains, I've borrowed from ISC Squared's ISC2.org website, the CISSP detailed content outline with the weights. And again, shout out, copyright to ISC Squared. And domain 1, security and risk management, 16% of the examination. And it spans these topics here. So I'd like to give you a bit of time on each of these topics and do some practice questions with you as well. And then we'll do similarly with domain 2. Okay, ready to get started? Ready to get started. Okay, so first of all, thank you, Brandon. I'm going to borrow from various resources that we have to use in our classes. The first resource I'm showing over here is Training Camp's Student Notebook. And it's a kinesthetic tool. It's a fill-in-the-blank tool that I like to use in class because it does highlight key points. Now, we'll be borrowing on this. We'll borrow on some of Training Camp's practice questions. Also, I create summary slides for my groups to pull together a lot of different thoughts. Another resource I use in class is from ISC2, their PowerPoint slides, but I didn't have a chance to go through the permissions asked, so I'm not going to show those, but again, outstanding resource as well that I like to use in classes. So first of all, wanted to bring up ISC2's Code of Ethics. Just like any organization, ISC2, we have a code of ethics. We need to help direct your good behavior as a member of our organization. Because remember, things can be legal, but in the eyes of an organization, it might be considered unethical. So ISC2 does convey its expectation for behavior. Now, up top here, we have the preamble, safety and welfare of society and the common good, duty to our principals. And by the way, these principals are the organization who employs us. And to each other requires that we adhere and be seen to adhere to the highest ethical standards of behavior. Again, super important for us as CISSPs. So strict adherence to this code is a condition of certification. And indeed, members can lose their certification for noncompliance. Now, again, this is a kinesthetic tool. So in my classes, you would be filling in the blanks. So our first priority is to protect society. Life safety is our top priority. And by the way, these are in a prioritized order. So life safety, protection of the infrastructure, public welfare, top priority. Then our second priority is to act honorably and legally. So it's about us as an individual. We're to act honorably and legally. And of course, provide diligent service to our principals. These are the people who employ us. And continue to advance and protect our profession. So just as an example of the fourth priority with ISC squared, so I'm in the Los Angeles area, we have an ISC2 chapter here in Los Angeles. So, of course, I'm a promoter of the chapter. I gave one of the very first chapter presentations at a virtual meeting during the pandemic lockdown. And we have a pattern, which I think is very doable for working professionals. We have 2 virtual meetings a quarter and 1 in-person meeting a quarter. So that's nice for virtual networking, in-person networking. There's always educational content. And our meetings, you earn 2 continuing education unit hours, because that's always important too, is to keep up your certification. So I do want to I'll offer everyone, you're welcome always to join wherever you are, our virtual chapter meetings. So it's the ISC2 Los Angeles chapter. And if you're in town when we have a physical meeting, like tonight is a physical meeting, you're welcome as well. Now, so again, this is a sample slide from training camp, but I sometimes add a couple of other details important for the test. ISC2 does have an ethics committee that oversees compliance with the code of ethics. The website does have a complaint form, but you have the complainant have to name themselves, and a member can indeed lose certification if they're non-compliant. In addition, what I always like to do is, when possible, I have little memory tricks to share. And one of my memory tricks, I know this is going to sound silly, but PLOP, P-L-O-P, because our first priority is to protect the public, people. We need to act legally. We have to protect our organization, and of course, promote and protect our profession. So PLOP is my little memory trick. And again, the order of priority, very, very important for the exam, because you might face like a situational question, and have to kind of process it according to this prioritization. Now, the next topic in the exam guide is the 5 pillars of security. But I usually think people kind of know about this already. So what I sometimes do is I have pop quizzes for my students. So why don't you take a moment, everyone, and in the chat box, associate. Associate the number with the letter. So over here on the left side, I have a word bank with our 5 pillars of security. And then the descriptions I've based on the NIST glossary, National Institute of Standards and Technology. So go ahead and take a moment and associate number and letter in chat, please. Okay, about ready? Very nice, very nice. We have some 100%ers and some very, very good efforts as well. So the reason I do this, again, I kind of start sometimes areas with little pop quizzes, to kind of engage our brain. Also, terms and definitions, glossaries, that's the underpinning to be able to process questions and answers. Okay, so 1C, 2A, 3D, 4E, and 5B. All righty. So our 5 pillars of security. Oh, one other thought while I've got this up on the screen here is sometimes when I don't know what to do with a question, I grab on this, I'll say like a thread. I'll stare at the question. Could I relate it to confidentiality or integrity or authenticity or non-repudiation or availability? Can I draw on that thread to process the question? So recently, I took ISC2's cloud certification, the CCSP. And I've got to tell you, there was a question. I had no clue what to do. So I had to borrow on my own test strategies, and I stared at every word in the question. I'm like, oh, there's a word that is a synonym for integrity. And I was all excited. And then I took a breath and reread the question through an integrity lens. And it made all the sense in the world. So for the exam, I want you to know synonyms and antonyms as well. Now, the next topic in the exam guide talks about security governance. And as I begin, I want to point out security governance exists to support the organization. So it does need to strategically align with the organization. Security has to support the organization. But before I go too far, let me ask a question, everyone. Who's at the top What role is at the top of the organizational pyramid? What role is at the top of the organizational pyramid? Good thoughts, good thoughts. Branding, go higher. Go higher than the CEO. Yes, Karen has it there. Excellent, excellent. The board of directors. The board of directors is actually at the top of the organizational pyramid. Yeah. And the board of directors might have, for example, the CEO, might have the CFO, but also independent directors who, yes, as Tremaine says, they come out of other business organizations. They know how to run a company. So we'll call them like industry veterans, maybe industry luminaries. But the board of directors is at the top of the organizational pyramid. It also, if I can mention, one of its many committees is known as the audit committee. That can consist only of non-employee board of directors. So for example, the CEO cannot be on the audit committee, but by its name, obviously it oversees audit, but also it oversees legal compliance. It also oversees risk, including in our context, cybersecurity risk, information security risk. Now, the board of directors actually hires and can fire the chief executive officer, or some organizations might call it a president. But again, board of directors hires or fires the CEO, chief executive officer, and or the president of the organization. And of course, that chief executive officer puts together their org chart, puts together their organization, and typically has a chief operating officer. And then there's chiefs of various administrative functions like chief financial officer, chief HR officer, chief legal, as a couple of examples. And then they set up various lines of business. And of course, close to our heart becomes the chief information officer, along with the chief information security officer. Now, obviously, we would love to have a devoted CISO, right? That's what we want. A chief information security officer with a seat at the executive table. But in some organizations, the CIO might also be the CISO, or the chief of legal might also be the CISO, or the chief financial officer, as another example, might also be the CISO. But again, we'd love for to be a devoted role, a person, one person with that role. Now, another department the CEO sets up is the audit department. And the reason I put that in a little different color is they are separate. Audit department is separate from these other departments. That way they avoid a conflict of interest in the audit work that they do, the examination and the testing that they do. They're checking to see that the company's intent is met. They're also looking to see that operations are as efficient as they can be, and of course, meeting effectiveness in terms of performance targets. So the audit department actually has two lines of reporting into the CEO and to the audit committee of the board of directors. So with the board of directors, they oversee the organization. They oversee the vision, the mission, the goals and objectives, along with the business strategy, how the organization is going to do what they do. Meanwhile, the CEO and the organization plan, operate, and report back and report back. So in our security context, we'll devise the security strategy, policies to come in just a moment, and work our way through all the organization to surface buy-in, make certain it's right fit for the organization, going to enable the organization, help enable the organization's business strategy so it can meet its mission, goals, and objectives. And the security strategy and policies, again, creating consensus and buy-in and making adjustments, going to the CEO for approval, and ultimately up to the board of directors for approval as well. So over here, when it comes to policy, it just doesn't happen overnight, let's just say. Policy has to consider the applicable laws, regulations, and contracts, legal requirements with security requirements. Also, of course, naturally has to consider the expectations, the priorities, and the direction from the board of directors and the executive management team. And in addition, considers various control frameworks. Now, all of that will be woven into policy, which becomes mandatory, must be done. And by the way, many organizations set up, say, a top-level security policy with maybe 1 to 2 dozen implementing or functional policies. These will provide more detailed requirements because the top-level policy, typically, we make it high-level, technology neutral, again, calls out expectations and security risk control objectives, along with, of course, the statement it's mandatory and there can be consequences for failure to comply. So each implementing policy, like as an example for access control, will call out more detailed access control requirements. Mandatory. Now, standards. Usually each policy will be supported by one or more standards. And there's various types of standards. But in general, standards all provide boundaries for proper interpretation of risk. They provide for consistent management of risk. So there's various types of standards. So like if I borrow an access control policy, you'll have an identity and access management standard providing requirements for requesting, approving, and provisioning accounts, maintaining accounts and access rights at least privilege, and of course revoking to stay at least privilege, and even revoking the accounts when they're no longer needed. So you'll have a standard along those lines, a standard for your authentication credentials, which include static replayable password requirements, one-time dynamic password requirements, biometrics, even another standard for on-site access requirements, another one for remote access requirements, another for session management. Even you'll have protocol standards, like for single sign-on, like OpenID or Kerberos, or federated identity management, like security assertion markup language SAML or OpenID Connect, or even product standards, like for those dynamic one-time password generators, whether you use a hard token, a soft token, as an example. Oh, by the way, standards like where I was talking about hardware, software, protocols, they all provide for interoperability, plus also bring the price point down because you can do volume purchases, site licenses, consistent training, bringing the price point down. Also, consistency in procedures. Procedures mandatory, step-by-step actions we take to complete a requirement. So procedures help us avoid errors and accidents and omissions. They serve actually as a training vehicle. They also serve to minimize risk because this is exactly how we do something. Now, baselines. Baselines, there's several variations to baselines. For example, how I configure an operating system. If you think about what version and patch level, the security parameter setting values. Like over here where I mentioned about a session management standard, how many minutes before a password protected screensaver comes in? How many hours for the maximum life of a session? Complexity of a password. So those details will be derived from the standards and programmed into the baselines. Also, the baselines, like for an operating system, what ports are open, what ports are closed, what are the approved services, and patch level of those services for those ports. There's also baselines for applications. Similarly, what version of the application and patch level, values for the security parameter settings to be programmed in, or baselines for an endpoint to include the OS in its OS in its baseline, the approved applications and their baselines, but also the additional security tools like antivirus, host-based intrusion, host-based firewall, endpoint detection, automated response. So baselines, the approved configuration, how things should look. Also mandatory. Now, guidelines, D for discretionary. Guidelines are optional. They help us focus judgment, provide suggestions, recommendations, coaching tips. Pop question, everyone. To which of these can you not audit? Or, excuse me, can the audit department not audit too? Yeah, very, very good. As Charles says, yeah, the D's, the discretionary ones. Exactly. Not auditable. Now, another one I kind of just briefly mentioned was the control frameworks. Again, discretionary. Help us as security professionals focus our judgment. So, for example, a commercial public organization might borrow from NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, ISO, the International Standards Organization. We might borrow from Center for Internet Security, Critical Security Controls, or PCI for that matter. So they help us as security professionals focus our judgment to design and build out an information security management system along with the policies and such. By the way, when we're drafting out any of these, again, we're working through the in-scope organization to get feedback, make adjustments, build consensus, get buy-in. That way, when we work our way to the C's and the CEO, we've got our way paved for buy-in and approvals. And policies, by the way, go all the way up to the board of directors to show their commitment and sponsorship for the security program. And I also wanted to mention governance also includes roles. Roles with authorities and responsibilities. So I've been kind of borrowing on the board of directors and the executive management team already. Steering committee is one I hadn't touched yet. Steering committee is very, very important. Think about like steering a huge ship. So they're steering our security program, keep our security program on track, or if there's any hurdles, they help overcome the hurdles, and they help keep us prioritized to what the organization needs. So as an example, when the board of directors approves the policy, one of the lines in the policy is going to say scope. For what area of the organization can we design, implement, run an information security management system? So we want to make certain the steering committee includes representation across the in-scope business, because it's all about them, here to support the business, along with a lot of other assurance providers who lend confidence that the company will meet its objectives as well. Now, owners and custodians. I'm going to have some more slides coming along that will give you a better sense of that. But basically, when it comes to accountability, the board of directors is accountable for the whole organization. They're accountable for the health of the organization, security, health of the organization. Likewise, the C's, the executive management team, they're accountable also for the health of the organization. And sometimes the steering committee has C's on it, but if not, they're still accountable to right-size the security program, set priorities for the security program. Plus, they are the approving authority for the standards that set proper interpretation for risk, proper interpretation to meet the security policies. Now, owners. The company will have an inventory of assets and assign assets to owners. Owners become accountable for their assigned assets. And as we move forward into the slides, you'll see some of their authorities. Now, I do want to distinguish with custodians. Custodians are actually responsible performers. They're helpers. They're helpers to the owners. And again, you're going to see some more of that on the upcoming slides. So let's just move onward. I know I've spent time there. But again, I create a lot of summary slides. That way we pull thoughts together. Now, over here, after I do a section, I like to do some rehearsal questions to, of course, talk about knowledge and principles, but also to talk about test-taking strategy. So go ahead and read this question. Oh, let me borrow something. Mention about strategy. When I do practice questions with my groups, I always like everyone to start, read the question, and look at answers from the bottom up. Look at answers from the bottom up. So read the question first and evaluate answers from D. Rule it in, rule it out. Then go to C, in or out. Okay, so we've got a lot of interest in B Bravo. Okay, so reporting to the CEO, that's definitely helpful. Definitely helpful. But do we want to get messages and suspected impact of an organizational breach known as soon as possible? Ooh, we've also got interest in C Charlie now too. So here's the thing. Usually when we've got a security incident, we kind of do a little what I call qualification. Is it truly a security incident, or is it a false positive? And then once it's, yes, this is a security incident, we do a prioritization. And some of your organizations might call it the severity or the criticality, but in association with prioritization, severity, or criticality level, there's a time ticker for assignment of an incident handler, and also a I'll call it how high up in the organization needs to know about that incident. So if it's a lower priority, chances are we're not waking up the CEO in the middle of the night. But if it's your top level priority, yes, yes, the CEO, working up the chain of command to the CEO, yes, will be woken up in the middle of the night. So this is what I like to call kind of an extreme answer. So whenever I have extreme answers, I want to be super careful. So the other one that they're as interested in, how high up in the organization as possible, maintain visibility for security, limit the inaccurate translation of messages. Do you see here how this is kind of more of a general answer? General answer. So it does meet our principles. We do want to be as high up as possible. Reporting to the CEO would be awesome. And we do want to avoid that conflict of interest, which would possibly quiet our messages or inaccurately translate them. So that's where C Charlie does come in as a stronger answer. So whenever I call it a high-level question, I want to have a high-level answer, kind of an umbrella answer that can include other answers as well. Okay, let's do another practice question.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, I've been a CISO for 20 years. And if you're reporting to somebody other than the CEO, there better not be many minutes in between the two reports.
Yeah, we'd love to report to the CEO. I agree, Mark. I think that would be the best, but it was the second part of that question. Second part, excuse me, not the question, second part of that answer that kind of got us into, I'll say, testing hot water. So that's why it's going to be super important on the exam to read the entire answer all the way through, because they will pull, I'll say, stunts like that.
Right. There's a piece to the message that we're in upstate New York, where most of the organizations are smaller and the C-suite know each other personally. So if you're at Citibank, I would have picked C in the first place. But, at an organization with less than 5,000 employees in upstate New York, I'd probably call the CEO first.
Yeah. And that's appropriate because you're taking into account, I'm just going to jump back here, you're taking into account the expectations of the board of directors and executive management team to come up with your particular strategies there.
I'm just teasing a little bit that I've never worked for a CEO who wanted to hear that from somebody other than me.
Yep. No, I agree. But for the test, we're going to kind of look in general on the test on something like this. All good and great to hear your voice, Marco.
Answer C could be the CEO, because that could be as high up the organization as possible to maintain visibility. So, I mean, it could be that it is the CEO.
Exactly as Charles says. Yeah, as high up. So that's why C Charlie, it's a general answer. It's an inclusive. It could be the CEO. Absolutely. It was just that I'll say this last part of B Bravo gets us into, I'll call it, testing hot water. It gets a little nichey on us. Good job, and good discussion. Take a look at this one, please. So on this, whoopsie, wrong side there. So on this one, I'm spotting interest in C and in A. So first of all, again, read the question, and to let you know, ISC squared is famous for putting in incorrect, or they put in the not towards the later part of the question. Okay. So that's why read the question all the way through, because they could put a twist or a turn at the very end. So which of the following is incorrect? And between C and A is the one that's incorrect. Standards are rules that do have to be followed by everyone in the organization. C, Charlie, is a true statement. Guidelines are suggestions, recommendations, coaching tips. Sometimes they're backstories, background information. But this one is distinctly wrong. Okay, good work there. Good work. Now, the next item on the exam guide, the detailed content outline, deals with enacting risk management. And I've just selected a couple of slides from my typical presentation. So to give you a teeny backstory, there are typically 4 major phases to risk management. First, you have to identify as much risk as possible. So you think about having the inventory of assets, threat survey, what are the dangers to those assets, and what's the harm that can happen to the organization. So we write out risk scenarios through the identification of risk. Then we assess the risk related to each of those risk scenarios. And assessing actually has a few steps to it. One is, what's the likelihood that threat will find its way through to cause harm? What's the size of the harm or damage? That's the amount of risk. So we analyze the amount of risk by combining likelihood along with impact. And then we need to evaluate it to our organizational scale. Is it within acceptable limits of risk or above? So let's talk a little bit more about that step. So first of all, there's several different methods. And what they consider is, do I have the time? How much time do I have for the risk assessment? Do I have people? Do I have all the data that I need? So if the answer is, no, I don't have a lot of time. No, I don't have a lot of people. No, I don't have a lot of hardcore data. That's where we probably use a more subjective approach. And the subjective approaches are qualitative and hybrid approaches. But where I do have the time, do have enough people, do have access to a lot of good hardcore data, that's where we'll use the quantitative, the more numeric risk analysis approach. Okay, so as far as the qualitative and hybrid, again, these are more subjective, and the example training camp offers here, this is one of the training camp slides, is they're using a 5-tier approach. 5 tiers in terms of likelihood, 5 tiers in terms of severity. Now, your organization might use a 2x2, 3x3, 4x4, 5x5, whatever your standard approach is, but this example's a 5x5. And then typically you'll have like lower and upper boundaries for what we mean by improbable, remote, occasional, probable, or frequent. And likewise on the severity or the size of the impact, the size of the harm or damage, again, there'll be lower and upper boundaries for what we mean by negligible, low, moderate, significant, or catastrophic. And the reason I still want to have those lower and upper boundaries for each level is that we have consistency in how those amounts are rated. And by the way, typically we do a bit of workshopping. We have a lot of subject matter experts, people who are very familiar with that operational area to do this rating. And let's just say they rate the likelihood as remote or 2, the level of severity, catastrophic, a 5. So analyzing the amount of risk in this particular example, 2 times 5 is 10. Then for consistency, we'd have an overlay to evaluate the amount of risk. And many call this overlay that I have here a heat map, such that between 16 and 25, it's critical risk, 10 and 15, it's high risk, 8 to 10, medium risk, and then less than 6, maybe it's the acceptable amount of risk. So just to let you know, by laying the numbers in, that gives it that hybrid flavor. But these are not true numbers, they're relative numbers. But again, we have a way now we can evaluate the amount of risk, prioritize it according to the organizational scale, such that, as you notice down here in the lower left-hand corner, green, no action is needed. Lime green, we're just going to monitor. Yellow, we've got to take some action. Kind of that peachy red, got to take urgent action, maybe within a week. But that cherry red, we've got to stop doing it. The risk is so severe. But here's the thing. Qualitative and hybrid, again, they're subjective. You do not get hardcore numbers to do like cost-benefit analysis. That's where the quantitative would come on in. And with quantitative, the N of quantitative reminds me, I gotta get numbers for everything. And that makes this very objective in nature, very evidence-oriented in nature, because you actually need to cite where you get the numbers from. Like, oh, we used our incident history. Oh, we used the insurance company's data. So the numbers, again, evidence-oriented. And that takes a lot of time and energy because, for example, you might use historical data, but then need to do like an economic upspin or downspin to it. So then you'd even have to cite the formulas that you're using and why you're doing that upspin or downspin to make the numbers more accurate. Now, as far as quantitative risk analysis, we actually are going to do a little bit of math And yes, on the exam, you do need to know your formulas. And if you have to do math, there is a calculator for you. So the first formula over here, SLE, is shorthand for single loss expectancy. And the way we calculate how much you would lose in a single event or the impact of a single event, we take the asset value times the exposure factor. An exposure factor is if the threat gains exposure to your valued asset, what percentage of the value do you lose? Do you lose 25%? Do you lose 80%, 100%? So single loss expectancy, the size of the impact, the size of the loss, asset value times exposure factor. Annual loss expectancy, how much we'd lose in a single year, is annual rate of occurrence, how often per year, times the single loss expectancy. So there's an example on this chart. Let's say we have technicians who work to disinfect viruses. So the asset are our people's time, our people and their time. That's an asset for the organization. So we cost the technicians pay the technicians $1,000 to disinfect a virus. All of their time is devoted to that task, so that exposure factor is 100%. Now, the impact then is $1,000 lost, how much money we lose in a single risk event. And then, of course, how often does a virus occur? Well, this organization, I'll say, is pretty lucky. Twice per year, 2 times per year. So annual loss expectancy is $1,000 per event times 2 events per year, or the annual loss expectancy of $2,000 per year. Now, it turns out with quantitative, we can do a little bit of guidance towards how much money we can spend on controls to improve the situation. So with that ALE of $2,000 per year, we're not going to spend more, not going to spend more than $2,000. But let's just say there's a control. We consider, well, how much does that control help us out by reducing the risk? So we can do cost benefit analysis. We look at the cost of the control compared to the risk reduction benefit of the control. Now, some organizations go even a step further and do return on investment, ROI calculations. So for us, it's return on security investment. And yep, that's another formula you probably would want to know for the exam. But anyhow, just moving a bit onward, because usually in my classes, I, goodness, probably have, well over an hour time on just risk management. But just to move into the third phase here, the risk response or risk treatment. So for risks above the acceptable level, they do need to be responded to or treated. And there's 4 classic ways. And with avoidance, you just stop doing that risky activity, cease, halt it, or take an alternative approach where the threat cannot gain exposure to the valued asset. That's avoidance. With transference, I love that note, making it someone else's problem. Usually what we do with transference is sharing the risk with a third party, like an insurance company. Accepting the risk acknowledges that the risk is there. We know it's there, but no further action is taken, other, of course, than monitoring. Now, with mitigation, the M of mitigation reminds me I'm going to spend money on controls. So we'll decrease risk through controls. So each risk has to be treated, and these are the 4 classic ways. Now, if we're going to spend money on controls, mitigate the risk, that's where we can look at the control types. I always think of control type as how I apply the control. So I can apply the control physically, such as through facility controls, or so think about like badge readers, for example, fences, guards, or administratively or through managerial controls. So those will be like procedures, training, supervision, or through technical or logical controls through our networks, our servers, our applications, our endpoints, cloud controls. Now, also down here where it brings up control category, that's where I think about the purpose for the control. And just notice over here, there's a little delineation before something bad happens, after something bad happens. So directive controls, like the name says, directs, it mandates. So think about laws, think about policies. Deterrent controls aim to discourage or dissuade a violation. Think about like a login warning banner. Does that stop someone from doing something wrong? I always think it just keeps honest people honest. That's a deterrent control. Discourage, dissuade. Whereas a prevent control blocks, stops the violation, or at least aims to. Now, if there were a violation, our detective controls would recognize the violation and alert. Corrective controls would be like incident response or disaster recovery, aiming to keep the incident small, manageable, keep the losses within acceptable limits. And of course, recovery controls bring us back to normal business. So, and I see Tremeen's note in chat. Yeah, it is more difficult to determine quantitative, with ransomware and 0-day. Ransomware with the crypto hijacking and basically kidnapping your data and holding your data for money. That there we look at the disruptive costs, the unavailability, the unaccessibility, and business impact. The longer and longer the disruption. And with 0-day, where the attackers are already exploiting vulnerabilities that no one else even knows about it. So losses can be accumulating already.
Absolutely. And just to give a little more meat to that is, I work in a healthcare delivery organization where typically our most vulnerable systems are our specialized systems, such as network connected medical systems, IoT systems, where generally the lifespan of those type of devices far exceed the general support of traditional OS or application support. So you have to weigh the cost of one. How do you quantitatively decide a number on protecting these systems when the value of these systems can far exceed $5 million per device? So it's definitely a challenge.
Absolutely. And and many of those, like you just mentioned, hospital environment, life safety, attaching values to human lives. There's a whole discipline of dealing with those economics too. Very challenging. Now, on the screen here is one of training camp sample questions, and it's aiming to take, yes, a two-dimensional static format and give you a little flavor for one of the innovative questions, like where you would do a drag and drop, like taking directive control and dragging it onto the definition, or detective control and dragging it onto the definition. So the way it works here is some various combinations of those drag and drops, like, so matching like A to the number, B to the number, C to the number. Which row? Which row do you think it is? So let me give you a couple of moments here. All righty. Looks like we've got some folks answering in chat already. Okay, so on this one here, so on this one, it is, oops, there we go. It is D delta, D delta. Oh, and happy to help answer Emily's question. Like when we had those standard multiple choices, and I asked read answers from the bottom up. Couple of reasons. One is to slow you down, make your brain consider all four answers unbiased. Plus, this exam is known for having two good answers. So when people go top down, they go, oh, A, B is right. Their brain kind of anchors to B. And then if C or D is a better answer, brain doesn't want to unanchor from B. So in that case, you might get that question wrong. So by reading from the bottom up, slows you down a wee bit and forces your brain to consider all four answer options. Because again, this test is known for having two good answers. So we have to look at all four. Okay. Now, another item on that exam guide content outline is compliance management. So a little earlier where I was mentioning about, those mandatory elements like policy standards, procedures, and baselines, when those are approved, they're approved at the acceptable level of risk. So that means we do want to measure compliance to keep things in conformity or discover nonconformity, because nonconformity creates risk. So basically, we want to identify the purpose of a particular compliance test and the scope or boundary for that test, and certainly identify what are the applicable external controls to that scope, like laws, regulations, and contracts, and naturally the applicable internal controls, like policy standards and baselines, procedures, and then the expected controls. And again, I know up here I'm in the administrative control family, but also the expected technical controls and physical controls to satisfy those mandates. Then we'll select the compliance assessment type. Like for example, oh, we're going to do a vulnerability scan. And then we'd initiate, say, a compliance testing template. And I love using templates for consistency, that people don't accidentally forget a discussion point. So again, in the template, we remind of the purpose for this compliance test, the scope or boundary. So we're going to do a vulnerability scan against this subnet. It's going to include these devices, their operating systems, their applications, and we're going to measure to their approved baseline. Now, sometimes we might tailor a little bit from the irregular baseline if maybe there's some approved exceptions, or maybe we have to run a supplemented baseline because we're in a higher risk environment. So we want to have some additional test procedures for those supplementations. But then other parts of the template will discuss what's the right time to run this test, how many hours we can run this test for, with whom do we need to coordinate to get approval, and of course, what risk does running this test introduce? So all testing has to be approved. And then we might optimize procedures to reduce duplication of effort and increase cost effectiveness. Like, for example, what if we need to do this testing for both PCI payment card industry and Sarbanes-Oxley? Well, then maybe we can time the testing so the test results can apply to both. That way, we're minimizing interference to the business, and we're also being, again, cost efficient in use of our people and use of our compute resources as well. But again, always have to have approval to run any test, and then we'll execute the assessment and evaluate the findings. So let's say we find non-conformance systems. Well, have to rule out false positives. Maybe there's an approved exception for one of those nonconformities. But for any of the findings of genuine nonconformities, we rate the risk, prioritize, in other words, and then there's an associated timeline for corrective actions based upon the level of risk. And then, of course, report the assessment results to the control owner, who's accountable, answerable for that control, and that person begins, with the support of their custodians, the corrective actions within the agreed upon timeline. And yes, we do need to report results to the steering committee who oversees the security program. And then, of course, we'll return back to reassess the corrected issue to confirm it has been corrected. So does anyone remember the United States president who said, "We trust, but we verify"? Yes, exactly, Cal. It was Ronald Reagan. My family and I went to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library just a couple of weeks ago, so that was kind of fun. Now, one thing I did kind of hint at as I talked through that is exception management. So in class, we talk about the exception management requirements and create an exception management process, and of course, a risk register, because we need a catalog of all of these exceptions, because those are risks above the acceptable level of risk. And when I say exception management, using separation of duty, requester separate from approver, separate from the provisioner. So I guess we security, we're kind of the provisioner on it. We're keeping this risk register, and risks, exceptions cannot live forever. Usually I put a maximum length of time of 1 year. That way they're reevaluated every year. And I even sometimes, as I said, I'm a security consultant practitioner. So I'll sometimes say, oh, critical risk cannot last for more than 3 months without review. High risk, no more than 6 months without review. Oh, goodness, I just looked at the clock. I'm getting so involved. Yeah. Oh, great question, Tremaine. So with the exception management, yes, if an exception is approved, it's typically approved with some creative compensating controls as an interim. And then, of course, that plan of action, the poem for how they're gonna do the correction within the agreed upon time. Yep. In GRC, as Tremaine brings up in chat there, GRC, I know they kind of blend the three together, governance, risk management, compliance management, that they are distinct disciplines. They overlap, of course. But yeah, the poem, the plan of action and milestone for how they're going to get the corrective actions in place within the agreed upon timeline. So we security can circle back and retest as part of compliance testing. Excellent. Just to mention over here, there's a variety of threat modeling techniques that we would go through in class, but essentially we model how those threats, those dangers would find their way through vulnerabilities and reach our valued asset, the harm, and then of course, the size of the harm and the prioritization of that harm such that we can look at control recommendations. So essentially with threat modeling, we consider all the ways the attacker might get in or even exfiltrate data on out. So we look at all that different attack surface area. So these are 6 approaches that I would discuss in class. But let me just offer another practice question here. Take a look at this one. Oh, and by the way, this is emulating like a drag and drop. Drag the correct answers into the correct bucket. How's that? So always kind of look at the directions. Let's get some more answers in chat. Let's get some more. All righty. Okay. So here we've got interest in B and D. B and D. Okay. So first of all, on number 4, attack surface describes logical, technical ways they might be able to get in, ways to get data out. This piece down here is a little bit narrow. The reason is the attackers could use social engineering, try to trick our people to get in or pull data on out, or they might use physical means, physical break-in. So 4 is just a little bit narrow. 3, surface area describes all the ways they might get in. So that kind of bumps us up. It's a little bit more general in nature. And with regard to number 2, I'm going to say number 2 is a true statement, but does it answer the question? And the reason I want to bring this up is, as I mentioned, I recently did my cloud exam. And I remember looking at a lot of these kind of things where an answer, an answer is a true, valid answer, but it doesn't answer the question itself. So that's how, I have to kind of rule it out. And similarly, I'm just gonna, even though I know no one chose number 1A, but again, it's a true statement. But again, does it answer the question? So over here then, 3 becomes the best choice. So C Charlie on this one. So I just wanted you to see some of these questions, sample questions, because on the test, you're going to see a lot of these different style, and I need you to know how to tackle these kind of questions. And another one I wanted to show you, this is like a scenario style question where you're going to have, say, several paragraphs. And what I always do on scenarios is I find the question mark and I read the actual question first. Then I go to the paragraph and I read the paragraph. That way I read with purpose. So go ahead and give this one a try. So on this one, we've got interest in B and C. So I'm going to mention both of these are what we call fraud controls, right? To limit the extent of fraud. Separation of duties is a very, very, very strong fraud control because it takes a task, breaks it into 2 pieces, and assigns a different person each part of the task to complete the entire transaction. Whereas least privilege, I want to grant you access to the fewest amount of resources. You need to do your job, but also fewest amount of permissions to do your job and for the shortest amount of time. So again, fewest resources, fewest permissions, and the shortest amount of time. That's where allowing tier 1 techs read-only access to system routers suits C Charlie there. Hey, good effort there, good effort. And let's do another one. This is actually one of mine. And again, I kind of, sometimes when I start an arc, I do a pre-question to get people's brains thinking. So take a look at this one. What number and letter combination? So my word bank is over here. And these are my descriptions. So what number and letter combination? Okay. Looks like we've got a number of answers. Okay. Very good. Very, very good, everyone. C, B, and A. Nice job. Then there would be an arc on business continuity and disaster recovery planning. And the reason, as you see on the screen here, I do some of my summary slides. That way you can kind of see the big picture. Because ISC squared loves to test on processes. What's the purpose of the process? Of course, this one, continuity of the organization, protect the lifeblood of the organization if there were to be a disaster. What are the phases of the processes you see on the screen? And always think sequencing. What has to be done and approved before the next done and approved? And by the way, most life cycles do begin with some type of project initiation, such as here, a business case and a policy, gathering requirements. But here we use the business impact analysis to gather requirements. So always think about sequencing, what has to be done and approved before you can go on to the next step, done and approved. Now, most life cycles end with disposal and end of life, but I just want you to notice this life cycle does not have an end of life. We always want to keep the business continuity capability fresh, relevant to the business. That way the business can continue to survive. Now, the way ISC squared has this organized is in domain 1, work on these first 2 steps, and then domain 7 picks up with the balance. So in the first 2 steps, like with the business continuity business case, it's going to provide what are the expectations for the business continuity program, the scope for what parts of the organization, and if there's any limitations for business continuity. It will, one of the early outcomes will be a policy that will codify these expectations, the scope or boundary. In addition, the policy will describe a criticality scheme. Like some organizations might use Englishy words like critical, vital, normal, and other organizations might call it like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So it will call out that criticality scheme and the number of hours or days or weeks associated with each of those levels. And then it will call out the framework that you're going to use. So for example, these other steps would be part of the framework, and also roles with authorities and responsibilities. And then the first step, as you see here, the framework, conduct the business impact analysis, and that's what's used to discover a whole bunch of different recovery objectives. So in class, we'd spend probably towards an hour talking about all of these stages and the BIA. So with the BIA, we learn how losses accumulate the longer and longer we're disrupted. And oftentimes you visualize those losses like on a graph where time is on the x-axis and the losses or impacts are on the y. And management looks at those losses and says, yeah, I can absorb, but yikes. At this point in time, the losses become so insane. That becomes known as the maximum tolerable downtime, also known as the maximum allowable downtime. So do you want to wait until management gets mad to be up and running, or do you want to be up and running a bit ahead? You want to wait till management gets mad, or do you want to be up and running a bit ahead? Okay, Tasia says ahead. So that's where recovery time objective comes on in. Recovery time objective is a point in time before management gets mad. Oh, see, I'm not teaching the Pennsylvania class next week. I'm sorry, I'm not. I'm actually teaching an ISACA SISM next week, but I'm certain you'll enjoy the instructor there. Now, recovery point objective, that has to do with the integrity of the data that you've backed up to offsite storage. And you think about that as what's your tolerance for lost data. And then also the BIA analysis includes discovering what are the critical resources. And that's where I think about what's necessary to feed a business process, operate a business process, and even deliver to its consumer. So you have to think about resources, hardware, software, data, networks, peoples, staff members, insourcers, outsourcers. All of those are critical resources. So domain 1 does focus on these, and then again, domain 7 picks up with the balance. But looking at the clock, I just want to point out domain 2, asset security. Again, even though it's only 10% of the exam, we have to be strong there as well. And these are the topics in domain 2. And I thought I would have time to talk through some more of domain 2, but I need to get through a bit more that I promised I would. Domain 3 at 13% of the exam, just to let you know, is another important foundational domain. So much so, it actually informs that information here is used by the remaining domains. So it is a very important domain, even though it's only 13% of the exam. And a teeny earlier, I borrowed on that one question about the number of questions of the exam to even give you a little tidbit on the BBA security model. And then domain 4 at communications and network security, 13% of the exam. Again, uses our earlier basis plus adds in a lot more. And I'm just going to jump back a teeny moment. In domain 3, a lot of new material was brought in about the cloud. And that was actually one of the reasons I got my cloud security CCSP certification, because I wanted to get myself up to date there and also get a sense of the test too. And then likewise here with communications and network security, it even has a lot of the cloud and virtualization capabilities blended into this domain too. And then with domain 5, identity and access management at 13% of the exam, it brings in a little flavor, yes, of physical security, along with naturally logical security. And teeny earlier, I borrowed on identity and access management to give you a sense of the access control policy and several of the standards. Tasha, did you have a question?
Yes. So I have a question. The remember when you said that if it'll stop at 100 and the exam will like start computing and then it'll give you additional questions in the event that you're just not there. Is it so if you say that you did get like the 70 or the 700 and maybe like domain 3 was at like a 64, is it gonna add on more questions from domain 3 or from that specific domain, whatever domain that you're not doing so strong in towards the end?
Right, it will give you more chances to show proficiency. But what's kind of quirky is like domain 3 questions kind of also look like domain 4 or 5 or 8 questions, there's overlap of topics across. So sometimes it's hard to distinguish. Like, for example, they might take cryptography and blend it into a network security question. Or they might take like a systems engineering question and blend it into a domain 8.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to see if like, I guess, because I think you said you had to get like 70% on all the domains in general, right?
Yeah, yep. So we have to show that we're above proficient. So I usually suggest people, like when they're doing practice tests. So we're going to talk about that and insights as well. But it's all practice questions are just kind of part of your study plan. But essentially, I'd love for people to be scoring in the 80s on hard questions. Not the softballs, but hard questions. And I think you were seeing some examples. I'm just going to flip through these other pages and get into the resources and some study plans along the lines of Cal's question there. So domain 7 here. And actually, a lot of our security lives are in domain 7. That's why you see a lot of material there. And domain 8. And even though domain 8, like I say, is only 10%, we have to be strong there as well. So over here, Cal had asked about the best content to review or studying before attending. Great question. You know what? Before attending, I would say take a look at the exam guide, and that's kind of what I was borrowing on for those top level slides there that I just flipped you through. Those are the topics that we need to know for the exam. So when people say about the CBK, the Common Body of Knowledge, it's not just one book, Common Body of Knowledge is actually a wealth of topics that we need to know about as a security professional. So all of these resources that are available internationally to address these topics, that's the Common Body of Knowledge. So I would say if Cal, if you take a peek at some of the NIST, some of the ISO ahead of time, that might be a good thought. NIST and ISO to take a look at ahead of time. And when you're registered for the training camp CISSP, you'll be given access to the education committee courseware. So I'm going to show that in a moment, but I should complete out this slide here, is that the committee, like I said, I was chair of the CISSP Common Body of Knowledge Committee in one of my many lives. We selected the topics that you would be tested on. There was a job task analysis given to CISSPs where they said what was important in their lives. And then all of those weights and percentages were prepared and documented in the exam guide. So internationally, all of the resources that address those topics are selected, and that's actually the Common Body of Knowledge. So the exam committee prepares courseware and the education, it's a separation of duty. Education committee prepares courseware and the exam committee prepares questions for the exam. So once you're registered for training camps, CISSP, you'll be given access. And this CISSP official textbook actually has like eight volumes to it. So I would say once you get access, start looking at it. Plus, with each chapter or volume, it includes glossaries and practice questions. Oh, and then there's an extra volume that has a whole practice test. Also on ISC Squared's website, there are flashcards available as well. So again, you can, as soon as you get access, start reading this, look at glossaries, do some flashcards, do some of the practice questions. Also, once you register, there's a set of training camp resources that are on a special link. And one of the resources is known as Training Camp Supplemental Exam Guide. There's some slides that have domain highlights. There's practice questions, practice tests, and study tips in there. So what I do is I assign homework. And also come the homework every night, and come Wednesday night, we start assessments. So there's 2 practice tests in this supplemental guide. I use one on Wednesday night, one on Thursday night. And then this is the training camp student notebook that has those key points, the kinesthetic fill in the blank tool. So I use this in class and borrow on these 2 as homework. But I'd say start on these as soon as you get access. Good. And I'm just looking
Is that the Chappelle book?
Pardon?
Is that the Mike Chappelle book?
Oh, no. This is not the Mike Chappelle book. This is actually direct from ISC 2. So the cover looks like this.
So I think I've been looking at this training from your company for some time, and the concern I have is me not being better prepared going into the training rather than going in trying to get all, because you can't get all the content in a week. There's just no way. And I wanted to make sure that I get enough training in before I go into this, so that this is more or less fine tuning what I should, what I haven't covered, or maybe highlighting or helping me drill in some areas that I need some more work on, right? At least that's my thought as far as this is concerned. So I think what I'm getting from you is probably would be best to pay for the training ahead of time and plan on taking the course a month or 2 out before you come to the training, so you have ample time to cover this material that you just covered with us here. Does that sound right? Or
When you say the course and the training, in my mind, can you help clarify what you're thinking of as the difference?
well, I'm the boot camp that you guys offer, correct?
Right. So the
Right.
boot,
So I'm just looking at, for as far as paying for the boot camp, I would like to cover this material ahead of time so that I don't go in and, not have a good coverage. There's a lot of material here to try to digest within just 1 week, right?
oh, yep. So if you and I'm not in the sales side, but talk to your account executive about signing up early and asking for access to the resources, so that way you could start reading a bit earlier, or start doing some of the activity a bit earlier.
Okay, great.
Yep, I just don't know how much in advance they make those available, because like I say, I'm not on the sales side. But I love your thought. I love your thought about getting a running start rather than a cold start. Um, on the Mike Chappelle book, he's done a very nice job, but he goes into it's a very expansive book.
Right.
It goes into some areas that might not be testable. So I would start, I personally start with these resources. And on the question banks, I just want you to know, no question bank is identical to the exam, okay? I need you to hold that thought. Nothing is identical to the exam. ISC squared, and I know the ISC squared, chief counsel, and they actively search for violations and send a cease and desist order to legally end anything that might have, let's say, pirated the exam bank. They're very, very aggressive. So I always want you to treat practice questions as rehearsal of exam strategy, like what we were doing, like reading answers from the bottom up, ruling in, ruling out, looking for characteristics of what might be a flawed answer to rule out, and rehearsals of our security principles and our security facts. And when it comes to practice question banks, I do want you to have various styles of questions, again, multiple choice, scenario, innovative, and make certain they are ones that have relevant security principles and facts. Also ones that have good difficulty level, ones that do have critical thinking and application style questions. So as I was sharing with my classes, we start my homework every night, does include reading, does include doing terms and definitions and flashcards and rehearsal questions. But then on Wednesday night, I start assessments. Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night. I think I even have a Sunday night, Sunday night assessment as well that has good, difficult, critical thinking questions in there. So like when people say, oh, I'm scoring 90% on this question bank, I have to ask, is it an easy question bank or a hard question bank? Because if it's a hard one, that's awesome. But if it's an easy one, that's okay. I just want to make certain you're using difficult questions. So again, I use for my assessments, the ISC squared courseware assessments, ISC squared courseware assessments as well. Also, again, I know we've been talking about some rehearsal question tips, but one other thing I want to bring out while I'm on this screen here is when I was doing my own CCSP, the cloud security test, what I did as far as preparation, I put myself in noisy places. I deliberately put myself in noisy places to do my practice test. And I am so happy I did that because at the actual exam, I was seated by the door. So I was hearing everybody, believe it or not, yes, I was hearing people going through the check-in process. And then, of course, there were people in this room and some were making noises or had squeaky chairs. So what I did, I put myself in noisy places. So I learned to give myself a bubble. So I was able to focus on the questions. So I forced myself to create a little bubble around myself, like a little force field around myself so I could focus. So I'm happy I did that. Second, I did increasing amounts of questions for strength training, just like I do with my students. They take 100, then 125, 150, another 150, 160, 170. So I make them, my students do strength training. So I did that to myself as well. Very, very important to do strength training because one, you've got to be able to handle 150 questions, right? So you have to have your brain strong to handle that. But I also want you to recognize, when does your brain get tired so that you give yourself permission to take a brain break. I'm going to say I'm happy I did that training to myself because I learned I get tired at 40 questions. So I was always giving myself a brain rest, closing my eyes in a couple of good cleansing breaths, and then I tackle another 40. Also, you want to make certain you have ample time to get all those questions done and time even to take if you need a comfort break. So strength training is very, very important. Also, I actually love, again, as part of test prep, is to prepare a study plan. And so I actually like people to create, write out, type out, and post their study plan. Involve their family and friends. If you have kids, let your kids write out, or practice flashcards with you. Involve other people. I've sometimes had years where, say I had a husband in a class and 2 years later, his wife was in a class, so they were able to quiz each other back and forth. So involve people, because this is a group effort to pass the exam, and do something every single day. Now, easy questions. Here's the thing. If you have a test bank of easy questions, the way you would use those, say you have 5, 10 spare minutes, do some easy questions. That's okay with me, because that keeps your brain going. Or, when I say just do it, what I sometimes do is I do some reading and then I do some practice questions. Do some reading, then maybe do some flashcards, just to vary things up as well. Also, over here, get yourself organized that day ahead. Super important. Now, I'll even say a couple of days ahead, if you're testing during off hours, like on an evening or on a weekend, call the test center and find out if there's special entry instructions. One time I was testing on a Saturday and they're like, "Oh, I'm glad you called ahead because I had to enter through a back door, go around the building and enter through a back door that was, yes, propped open." So check if there's any special entry instructions. Organize, have your two IDs. First one has to be government issued. The second can be government issued or something like a signed credit card. And again, do this the night ahead, because I was laughing at myself when I was getting myself organized for my cloud security exam. I looked at the credit card and I hadn't signed it yet, so I had to grab a pen and sign it. Review your driving instructions and have alternate paths in case there's construction or something. And yep, it's a good idea to print your exam admission sheet. Now, the day ahead also, I want you to have a lighter study day, review concepts, glossaries, and your special rehearsal question deck, and, give yourself a little practice test. But I know myself, I got really tired, and I'm happy I gave myself that day of lightness, so that way my brain was ready to hit it on the exam day. And absolutely, I have to emphasize this, get a good night's sleep and have proper nutrition. Those are some of the best things that you can do for yourself. Now, on your exam day, eat protein and complex carbohydrates for staying power. Leave early for the exam. Give yourself some extra minutes. Be early. Don't be late. Get there early. It's okay. And on arrival, review your concepts, your glossary, and warm up your brain with a few practice questions. The reason is this way, your brain is already in the groove. It's not like a cold start. Now, during check-in, just breathe, breathe. Your brain needs oxygen. Breathe. Be calm. The check-in process takes time. They take a photo of you. You have to sign on a pressure pad. You have to put your hand down on a palm vein scanner. So be calm, just keep breathing and be inquisitive. Ask the proctor, How do I take breaks as an example? Because you have to do everything by the rules. Now, after your proctor signs you into the exam, breathe. Again, your brain needs oxygen. Put yourself into that bubble like I talked about. No distractions. You've got a bubble around you. You've got a force field. You're focused on the exam in front of you. And you have to click the non-disclosure agreement within the first 5 minutes. Super duper important, or else it's an automatic forfeiture failure of the exam. So you got to click that non-disclosure agreement within 5 minutes or you forfeit. Use the whiteboard. You're going to be given a whiteboard and a marker. Use it to help process questions. Like if you have to do a quantitative risk analysis question, write down your formulas first and pick each variable out of the sentences before you plug them into the equation. Give yourself permission to take those brain fatigue breaks. Again, close your eyes and breathe. It's important for your brain. And if you need to take a comfort break, remember the clock does keep ticking. The clock keeps running while you take a comfort break, and you have to follow the proctor's protocol on taking the comfort break. There's a checkout process and a check-in process as well. And after you pass the exam, and this is also super duper important, within 9 months, you have to process your application. And if you don't have enough experience, you'll have an application to become an associate of ISC squared. And if you have sufficient experience, you're going to become a full-fledged CISSP. But if you do not process that application within 9 months, you get the pleasure of retaking the examination. And part of this application is to obtain an endorsement from a current CISSP, or if you don't know a CISSP, you would ask ISC2 to endorse you. That's where they're going to contact all of your references. Then, of course, once you get your CISSP, you need to maintain it. You need to give ISC2 money every year, submit your continuing professional education, also continue to abide by the code of ethics. I want to just emphasize, super important to maintain. I've had lots and lots of students across the years who had to retake the exam because they did not keep up to date with the continuing education. So feel free to ask more questions. I'm going to just, in chat, or open up your microphone. There were some questions I need to answer in chat. Yes, the recording will be available. Probably takes a little bit of time for it to process by Zoom, and then Training Camp will post it. And Brandon, yep, reviewing materials, flashcards, practice questions, that's great. And then again, make certain you're using difficult, challenging practice questions. And then Tremaine, there is overlap between CISM and CISSP, but CISM is very much upward organizational facing, like for the Cs and for the board of directors. Yes, it does get into a lot of governance, very important there for ISACA exams, but it does expect you had to have security technical knowledge as well. CISSP is more security technical. It does expect the strategic alignment with the business, but a lot more security technical. But one thing I want to point out is the CISSP is stated as a managerial level of exam. So be real important to understand about the business. Understand about the business. What does the business need? And how can security support the business? How can security enable the business? Any other questions? Other questions? And I love how you've all been great and asking questions throughout. That's awesome. Oh, and thank you, Tasia. You're welcome, Tasia. So if you want more information, Mike McNellis, he sponsors these webinars. Also, helpdesk@trainingcamp.com. And the Sean Harris book, Jivan, that's a great question. Sean was actually one of my students. Sean was one of my students. So I'm certainly very, very proud of all that she accomplished. Very sad that she had passed on a couple of years ago. But again, she accomplished wonderful things. The book is a very, very good security resource. I haven't seen any of the recent editions, just to let you know, but as a security resource, it kind of went beyond what the exam needed. A great security resource, like it went into like healthcare, protected health information, like HIPAA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley for protected financial information. So it went into a teeny bit more on some non-technical topics. But again, I'm very proud of all that she accomplished. Hey, anything else? Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you do Barbara Johnson, CISSP, because if you just do Barbara Johnson, there's like 40,000 of us. But Barbara Johnson, CISSP, happy to connect up over LinkedIn. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the nice notes, everyone. Thank you for the nice notes. I appreciate it. And thank you. I know I ran, I think about 15 minutes past. I appreciate the many of you who hung in for that extra bit of time. I'm happy to help out. And again, want to wish you all success. Wish you all success on the exam. Thank you so much. And best wishes, best wishes. Get out there and crush the exam. And I love the notes to each other throughout. It's very great. Again, everybody's supporting each other. Excellent. Anything more I could do? Alrighty, best wishes, everyone. And I'll go ahead and end this session. Thank you so much. Thank you for your valuable time. There we go. I love that, Cis. Absolutely. Excellent. Okay, best wishes. Bye.